So let's start with the second part of what is Azure. In our previous section, we had discussed about the 4 different layers which were associated with cloud computing. So we discussed the cloud computing architecture. Now, in this section, first let's start with understanding that how these four layers of cloud computing map with Azure components. So here's a simple snapshot I have which explains how every component is associated with Azure. So let's start with the base component, the first one, that is hosting platform. Now, as we know that the hosting platform is nothing but it's actually your physical hardware servers. It's your actually physical hardware servers, your operating system, your routers, your network, your power management, etc. So the first layer, the physical hardware, is nothing but Microsoft data centers. Currently, when I'm recording this video, Microsoft data centers for Azure is located in US West Coast. Must be that, you know, when you read this video, probably after some years it can be at more locations, but at this moment, to my knowledge, it's at US West Coast. So the first layer is nothing but the Microsoft data center. The second layer is termed as Azure Fabric. So in other words, the Azure Fabric is the cloud infrastructure services. So they help to monitor the compute, storage, and network. The third layer, that is cloud platform services, is nothing but these are software services which are provided by Microsoft, and these software services can be used by Azure applications on a pay-per-use model. So in the cloud platform services, Microsoft has provided .NET services, SQL Server services, SharePoint services, etc. So there are various software which are provided by Microsoft and which can be used on a shared model, on a pay-per-use model. And the final layer is your .NET application, which can be a web role or a worker role. We'll come to what is a web role, worker role, Fabric, Azure, etc. But at this moment, just try to understand that how Microsoft Azure components are mapped to cloud computing architecture. So now that we have understood the different components which are associated with cloud computing of Azure, now let's try to understand the architecture of Azure. So here's a diagram which we have, and this diagram basically highlights the various components which are associated with Azure. The bottom layer of Azure Fabric is nothing but the Microsoft data centers. Microsoft data centers which have bunch of physical hardwares, and every of these the hardware servers, and every of these hardware server have Windows 2008 operating system installed. Now all these all these operating systems, or all these physical hardware, are connected by something called as Azure Fabric. Now let's try to understand Azure Fabric a bit. Now in order to understand Azure Fabric, let's try to understand that how virtualization works in the Azure framework. So the bottom layer is your physical hardware, the data centers. Now Microsoft has a software called as a hypervisor. People who have worked with Hyper-V would be aware of this software. This software basically helps you to create virtual machines from a physical hardware. Now on a demand basis, so let's say that you say that your application is going to need 2 GB RAM, 80 GB hard disk, and dual processor, whatever it is. So depending on your demand, depending on your requirement, it creates a virtual machine for your application. So hypervisor will create a virtual machine, and it will allocate this virtual machine for your application to run. And this virtual machine is created from the physical hardware, from the physical hardware of the data center. Now, it's possible that many virtual machines can be created from one physical hardware. So, for example, from server A, you can see that there are 4 different virtual machines which are created, and all these virtual machines are weaved or connected together by using the Fabric. So, Fabric is like a cluster which connects all the virtual machines, and it manages these virtual machines. It monitors the compute, the usage, the bandwidth for every virtual machine. So coming back to the architecture of Azure, so that's Azure Fabric. Now there are 2 kinds of application you can run on this virtual machine. One is a web role, which is nothing but a web application, and the other one is a worker role, that is a Windows process. Now the web role runs under the IIS instance. So in other words, you have a virtual machine, and inside the virtual machine you will be allocated IIS, and inside the IIS your application, your web role will run. So this whole thing is a virtual machine. So inside the virtual machine you have a IIS instance, and inside the IIS instance your web role will run. Now web role have the capability to take HTTP calls from external world. The worker role doesn't. The worker role is like a Windows background process. So there are the external HTTP process cannot, or external HTTP request cannot be routed to the worker role directly. Both web role and worker role instance, they communicate with Azure Fabric through agent. So there's an agent component which helps to facilitate communication between the web role and worker role between the Azure Fabric. Now there are three different kind of storages which are given by Azure. One is blobs, tables, and queues. At this moment, we will not discuss about what is a blob, what is a table, what is a queue. We have a separate question for that. But these three things are nothing but they are different kind of data storages, and all these data storages can be called through HTTP. We'll see how to do that. So at this point, we'll just try to concentrate that what different things does Azure have. So just summing up, we have a Microsoft data center with a lot of physical hardware, physical servers. Then we have the Azure Fabric, which ties up together, or which networks all this hardware together, and it creates a virtual machine by using the hypervisor. And inside the virtual machine, you can either have a web role, which can be a ASP.NET or a WCF application, or it can be a worker role, which is like a Windows process. And then you have three different kind of storages: blobs, tables, and queues. So summing up what Azure is all about. Azure is a cloud computing platform. A cloud computing platform where pay-per-use model can be executed. So in other words, it's a place where you run your application, your web applications. It's a cloud computing platform, so it is designed to scale. It's a computing platform, where you pay only for how much you use. So Azure is more of a pay-per-use model. So you say that, okay, I need only 2 GB RAM, it will only provide you 2 GB RAM, and you have to only pay for 2 GB RAM. So in other words, Azure is a cloud computing platform, which enables you to, or which provides you a pay-per-use kind of a model. So I hope that we were able to define Azure, and in the coming up sections, what we'll do is that we'll first try to see that how we can calculate the cost of Azure. So tomorrow, if you say that, okay, I want to go and run on Azure first, so how do you basically do the costing of Azure? Remember that one important part of Azure is that Azure is more than technical. It is more, it's more of a business change. So if you say that, okay, I have my current application and I want to move to Azure, the first thing the management will ask is that how much is the cost in Azure, or how much is the cost of hosting your application in Azure. So what we'll do is that in the next question, we'll first try to understand that how do we actually take out the cost of Azure. So what I'll do is that I'll demonstrate a simple Excel sheet where you can put in your bandwidth, the needed CPU, the needed hard disk space, and that Excel sheet will calculate the Azure cost, the total hosting cost per month. And from the next question onward, we'll try to understand what is a web role, how to create a web role, how to use blobs, and how to create application. So I hope that this whole question and answer series will be useful for you, and see you in the coming up section where we'll be discussing about Azure costing.